Sis, I've divided the pie crust in two pieces. I'm going to take the first piece and I'm going to make sure I got lots of flour down. I'm going to work this out. What that was, I'm going to work this out and get our bottom crust going. I keep my flour close, get it nice and thin. So we're going to roll it out. You know how to do all this. Turn it over. Get it nice and thin, like that. And it'll be a little hard to roll because it's nice and cold, but that works best for me. Then we're going to throw it in our pan. We're going to make sure it's in there real well. Make sure it's along the edges. And then we're going to cut off any excess. We only want a little overhang, just a little. So we're going to cut that off. Should have got a knife that'd cut, huh? Cut all that off. And you save this dough because you can use this to make your apples or your tree or whatever you want to put on top of your pie. But you make sure it's down in there good so you've got good coverage on your pie pan. And when you think you're pretty close to having that, then you can just wad that up, put it over to the side, and we've got our pie crust in the pan. Step 2, we're gonna pour our apples in the bowl. I use this kind of cheap Tupperware thing. One of these full is about 8 cups of apples. So that's what I usually use for each pie. It kind of helps me measure it. I make a great big bowl of apples and then I measure it out in something like this. I put it in a bowl. I put a half a cup of white sugar. I put in a half a cup of brown sugar. And it doesn't take quite a half a cup. It's like 2 heaping tablespoons of flour. And then I put in a teaspoon of cinnamon. And at Christmas I put in maybe a shaker. I don't even measure it. I just shake a little nutmeg here and there, just a little, into the pie ingredients. And then I mix it together with my hands like so. And you get it all covered good in that flour and your apples and everything just all covered and done well. And it's easy when you use something to measure your apples out because then every time it's like the same thing. And it just goes pretty quick when you make stuff up in quantity. So you see I'm getting it nice and tossed. I cut my apples up sometimes a day or 2 ahead and put them in a big bag, but you don't want to keep them much longer than that or they'll get mushy. This is mostly Gala with a couple of small Granny Smith. Next, we're going to put our apples in the pie. And I just kind of spread them all out, get them evenly done. And it's going to look like you got way too many, but these are going to cook down. So just make sure you mash them and they won't hurt the crust. Get them down in there. And mash all that goody stuff in there. And I usually kind of make them higher in the middle. This is a little bigger pan, so the apples are gonna not go as far. But on an 8-inch pie, it's plenty of apples. So, and I don't cut them too big, as you can see. They're just kind of medium, and I just chip them up. Okay, that is what you do there. And then I go over here to the stove. And I don't measure it. This is a stick of butter, so it's a half a cup. I just pour it over the pie, and I save just enough butter to do my top. Okay, so now we're ready for our top crust. This is set there a few minutes, and if you take a while in between, you might put it back in the fridge, but usually it starts going pretty quick once you've done one or two. So we're gonna get our dough mashed out and kind of get it ready. And this is our top crust. And you want it to be even. And you don't get it too thin, but you want it thin enough that it's going to rise and bake well. And when you think you got it about right, then you just fold your crust, move your pie over here, pick it up, lay it kind of halfway on the pie, and do it over the top. And then you can kind of work with it a little. You'll see your apples. And again, I go around with my knife and I cut the excess dough off. If there's anything hanging really low, because you don't need a lot to turn under. I'm going to cut all that off. And just make sure you've got a little bit hanging over. Okay. The next part of it is I usually just kind of mash a little bit on it, just to make sure everything's covered good. Then you're going to start over here somewhere, and you're going to start turning it under. You always turn it under, because you're going to want to seal this when you do the rest of the crust. So just roll those pieces together and turn it under. If you get to a piece that's too big, cut it off, or just turn it under all the way around. And you'll have a nice ring around the pie. And those are going to fuse together when we put our design on the pie, on the edge of the crust. You'll fuse them together, and that's what's going to seal your juices and stuff in the pie. Now, with Gala apples, you're going to lose some juice, but you're not going to lose that much if you do it right. Then we're going to take our crust when it looks like this, all fused and turned under. And you can use your thumb or you can use your finger. I usually use my finger, and you're going to go down and mash. Down and mash, and you want to mash hard. Down and mash. Mine's not wanting to stay today, but mash just like that on each side, and that's where I get my design that I use on most of my pies. A finger, you can do your thumb, it's just whatever you want to do. The thumb probably works the best, but just mash all the way around like that. And you can work with it, you can redo it, but you'll come around and you'll meet the other side. And then when you get that done, you're always going to cut about 3 slits in the pie, just so that some of the steam can get out, because a lot of steam will get in there. The last thing I do, and I'm going to make this pretty simple because it's not a big deal, I usually always put 2 apples on the top of my pie. But at holidays and stuff, I do something a little different sometimes. Like today, I think I'm going to use a little Christmas tree. So what I'm going to do is take that excess butter that I had left, and I'm going to butter my pie. I'm going to take the little tree and put it right in the middle and just mash it kind of on top. Butter your pie all the way around with that excess butter, and usually you got a lot of butter made up if you're making several pies anyway. but just enough to cover it. When you get through with the butter, then we're going to take a little white sugar, and we're going to just sprinkle a little sugar on top of that crust, just like that. And that will make a nice candied crust. I always put a foil liner in the pan. If you use a big cookie sheet, you can just barely get 2 pies in there. And I usually try to put the pie on the bottom. Where my rack is, it's in the middle, but I put it on the bottom for a while and then I'll move it up because you don't want your sugar to brown too fast. Okay, here's your finished pie right out of the oven. You see it sinks. You'll lose some juices, but if you cook it at 325 to 350, depending on how hot your oven is, for about 55 minutes, this is what you'll come out of the oven with, and you'll have a great apple pie. I try to freeze mine for a week or so before I serve them, and then I warm them back up in the oven before I serve them. That way they cut beautifully. If you cut them when they're hot, they run just like any other pie. But hope you enjoyed my video.